Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to open a letter you were never supposed to read. It smells like sweat and sealing wax. The parchment's edges are ragged, folded and unfolded until the creases themselves seem tired. The ink is smudged by time, but by someone's impatient, possibly slightly greasy fingers. And when you tilt the paper, there's still a faint shimmer of what might have been perfume or gunpowder residue. Hard to say. This is Napoleon Bonaparte's handwriting. And he's not writing about military formations, he's writing about you, or more accurately, about Josephine. But let's be honest to her, Josephine, now, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this story travels. Now, let's turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some soothing background music and enjoy the evening ride together. You're crouched on the edge of a cot, flicking candle wax off a worn soldier's desk. Outside, someone's shouting about provisions. A mule kicks over a soup pot. But inside, it's just you and this paper. Napoleon has just won the Battle of Lodi. He's tired. He's riding high on adrenaline and powdered wig confidence. And he's writing this, barely even sitting down. Don't wash. I'm coming. I want the scent of you, unaltered. Wait, what? Let's pause and take that in. This isn't a desperate romantic whisper. This is a command from a man who just crushed Austria and now wants to sniff his wife like she's a ripe pear after battle. You half expect him to sign it, General of France, and also your armpits. Historians are still debating whether Napoleon had a heightened sense of smell or if he was just, Napoleoning, but this was no one-time slip. He wrote variations of this same message repeatedly. No perfume, no soap, no bath. He wanted Josephine as she was, which, given the state of hygiene at the time, meant somewhere between earthy and apocalyptically ripe. Still, there's something weirdly sincere about it. He was clearly obsessed. Her scent wasn't just a smell, it was proof she existed when he was surrounded by death and discipline. It was his tether to softness, too. Home to something vaguely human. And that's how you start to realize, for Napoleon, love wasn't separate from war. It was war, just waged in sighs instead of swords. The letter goes on. I will be in your arms in 3 days. Do not forget me. My every thought is yours. My body trembles to be near you. You can picture him writing this while still in uniform, fingers stained with gunpowder, a dispatch half folded under his elbow. One hand on a quill, the other, who knows, probably clenched. Napoleon clenched a lot. His obsession with Josephine was legendary and not always reciprocated. She was beautiful, yes, but also independent, flirtatious, and often emotionally unavailable in a way that drove him absolutely feral. He needed her. She was sometimes at a spa. He chased her through letters the way he chased empires relentlessly, with bad sleep and zero chill. And yet, the more you read, the more it feels like these letters were also performances, not just for Josephine, for himself, as if by writing passionately, he could become the version of Napoleon who deserved to be passionately loved. One scholar once said that Napoleon was never more exposed than in his love letters. Another said he used them as a form of emotional propaganda. And honestly, both might be right, because even when he's desperate, he's strategic. Your image is always before my eyes, he writes. It stands between me and my maps. That's kind of sweet. Until you remember that he once compared her to a volcano that has no fire. Yikesand another time called her a little traitor made entirely of silk and teeth. Look, romantic consistency was not his strong suit. Still, letter after letter. Even as she delays writing back, even as rumors swirl about her flirtations with handsome officers back home, Napoleon keeps coming back with more words. Longer ones, stranger ones, all of them scented, if not with ink and musk, then with something like emotional combustion. He doesn't just write to her, he writes at her, like she's a fortress, and he's laying siege. One letter ends with this. Be constant. Stay mine. I am already yours. And then, weirdly, don't forget the white gloves. Gloves. Historians are still debating whether that was code for something, or just Napoleon being Napoleon again. Maybe they had meaning. Maybe they were just gloves. The point is, even in moments of tenderness, he couldn't resist slipping in commands, requests, orders. You wake up in someone else's century, the sheets are too crisp, the ink on your fingers smells too fresh, and you're about to get ghosted by an empress. Welcome to Napoleon's love life. Josephine, formerly Rose Tascher de la Pagrie, was more than a pretty name in a post-revolutionary Rolodex. She was widowed, stylish, well-connected, and famously late. Late to salons, late to parties, and, most maddeningly to Napoleon, late to reply. If you've ever stared at your phone waiting for a typing bubble that never comes, you now share a spiritual thread with Bonaparte himself. He wrote her letter after letter, sometimes in a day, and the replies came back days late, if at all. You can almost hear him pacing. Except, instead of an apartment hallway, it's a marble war tent, and instead of snacks, he's surrounded by enemy scouts. I write to you, my beloved, he pens, and you do not write back. Am I forgotten? That question, am I forgotten, haunted him. He may have conquered armies, but he could not conquer that silence. Historians still debate whether Josephine's delays were accidental or tactical. Was she too busy with social life and garden parties? Or was she holding power through absence, the emotional equivalent of keeping someone on read? You flip another letter. It's dated just days after his Italian campaign began. He's in full conquering mode. He's spiraling. I wake up thinking of you. I eat with thoughts of you. I dream of you. Your silence kills me faster than musket fire. Napoleon, the military genius, commander of thousands, destroyed by the absence of a woman's words, it's both romantic and ridiculous. And you kind of love it. Even funnier, Josephine did write back occasionally, but her tone, chill, elegant, detached. She often responded with mentions of her dogs, her garden, or court gossip. You can almost hear the feather quill twirling in her hand. Meanwhile, Napoleon is writing things like, "Come, fly to me, run, gallop, arrive, and breathe life into your devoted corpse." Yikes. Someone give the man a chamomile tea. And yet, there's something touching about how unfiltered he is. The way he hands over his vulnerability like it's part of a treaty. He writes things like, "Your letters are my oxygen. My nights are barren without your ink. Even war gives me more signs of life than you do." At this point, you might be thinking, okay, maybe this is more obsession than affection. You're not wrong. Napoleon's letters reveal not just love, but a kind of emotional surveillance. He needed to know what she was doing, who she was with, what she felt. If he had to imagine it, and boy, did he imagine it. There's a scene in one letter where he writes, "I picture you reading this in the garden, the breeze in your hair, your fingers tracing each line with longing." In reality, she might have been getting a manicure, or feeding her pug, or flirting. And yet Napoleon scripts it differently, because that version hurts less. But this wasn't all drama. Sometimes he had to break character. In one letter, mid-rant about missing her, he writes, "P.S. Tell your brother not to sell the silver. Even emperors have errands. Still. It's in the spaces between the longing that you see something sadder, the power imbalance, the echo, chamber." Josephine didn't just delay letters, she delayed arrival. Multiple times Napoleon begged her to come join him at campaign sites, and she refused, or made excuses, or arrived weeks later. And every time she was late, he didn't rage. He doubled down on romance. "I will wait for you as the moon waits for the tide." That's not a threat. It's not even a metaphor. That makes total sense, but it is honest. There's a letter from 1797, the one where he begs her to come to Milan, that ends with, "If you do not come, I will come to Paris and drag you back in my arms." Historians still debate if that was literal or theatrical. Knowing Napoleon, probably both. There's also something distinctly modern about the whole dynamic. He love bombs, she pulls away. He escalates. She sends a single, polite response 3 weeks later, with a smiley face drawn in ink. Okay, not really, but you can feel it. And even though he's winning wars and rewriting maps, he still writes. Her lines like, "You are my compass. Without you, I lose direction." Except he didn't. He kept winning, which leads to a chilling irony. The more successful he became, the more Josephine seemed to fade into the background, and that drove him mad. Napoleon's mind was full of maps and maneuvers, but his heart was basically sending late-night you up. Messages across 19th century Europe. He was trying to conquer love with the same ferocity he brought to battle. But Josephine, she didn't surrender. She drifted. You're sitting on a wooden crate that used to be a cannon box. Someone spilled ink on it, probably Napoleon, and there's a suspicious stain that might be blood or just strong wine. Either way, your hands are freezing, your boots are damp, and you're surrounded by men shouting about horses, maps, and shoes. But Napoleon, he's writing another love letter. There's a torch jammed into the mud outside the flap of his tent, and the wind keeps sneaking in, fluttering the pages like restless ghosts. Still, he writes, and this time, he's not subtle. Josephine, my conquest of you is unfinished. You evade me like a city with hidden gates. Oh boy, this is not just poetry. This is strategy, dressed as seduction. You read on, and it gets weirder, the most Napoleon way possible. Each night, I march across the fields of your memory. I storm your absence like a fortress. My longing is a siege. At this point, Napoleon isn't just writing love letters, he's planning emotional campaigns. He refers to her citadel heart and calls himself your general of devotion. You almost expect him to attach a battle diagram of her smile and a list of troop movements for her dimples. Historians are still debating whether he genuinely saw romance as a kind of war furor, if this was just how his brain worked, blending the emotional with the tactical until even desire had military structure. But here's the thing, he wasn't entirely wrong, because while Josephine floated above everything like a perfumed mirage, Napoleon was in the mud, literally. And emotionally, he was tired, sore, homesick, probably smelled like roast beef and ambition. And in those lonely hours between negotiations, bloodshed. And cannon blasts his letters to Josephine were the closest thing he had to sanity. They were also the only thing he wrote by hand. Most military correspondence dictated orders, delegated love letters, always personally penned, which is why they're so messy, intimate, almost too much. In one, he compares her absence to an open wound. In another, he says her voice is the only music not drowned by drums. You don't know whether to swoon or send help, but what makes this particular batch of letters so fascinating is how tactile they are. He doesn't just say he misses her, he describes the exact way he misses her. I remember your hand, soft, with the smell of crushed violets. I remember the space behind your ear that my lips knew better than maps. There it is again. Everything's a campaign, even body parts. But here's the odd detail that sticks out, the one that makes you tilt your head. In the margins of one letter, written sideways along the edge, almost as an afterthought, is this: I wore the scarf, you're left behind into battle. It smells like you. I won. Wait, what? Did Napoleon seriously bring a piece of Josephine's clothing into combat? Apparently, yes, at least once, possibly more. There's even a rumor, though historians roll their eyes, that he once tied her ribbon around the hilt of his sword during a siege. Probably untrue, definitely dramatic, but emotionally, very on. Brand. Because for Napoleon, Josephine wasn't just a woman, she was momentum. She was the imagined reward waiting after the battle, the reason to win, the victory beyond the victory. And yet, he never really got her, not in the way he wanted. You can feel it in his language how often he speaks to her rather than with her. He pours himself into the page like he's laying bricks, building a castle she might one day move into. And Josephine? She sends back a thank you note and a drawing of a peacock. Okay, fine. It was a pressed flower, but spiritually, still a peacock one. Of his most dramatic passages comes after 3 days without a letter. Do you know what it is to fear nothing in war, and yet tremble at a closed envelope? Honestly, that line deserves to be on a mug. But beneath the flourishes, there's a truth that hits hard. Napoleon was afraid. Not of battles, not of death. He was afraid of emotional abandonment, and his love letters, dramatic overripe, possibly. Sweat-stained were a form of defense, a way to fight off the silence. Of course, he couldn't keep the emotion neatly confined, because just a few letters later, he flips again. You are unworthy of my devotion. And yet, I remain your prisoner. Oof, emotional whiplash. You've heard of toxic relationships. Try reading Napoleon's drafts at 2 a.m. with no electricity and 4 grenades outside your tent. Still, you can't stop Dot because, as erratic as he is, he's honest. He writes like someone who doesn't expect to live long enough to revise. He's all impulse, all ache, and even though he's comparing kisses to cavalry charges, you believe him because here's the secret. Napoleon was at his most human when he wasn't fighting for France, he was fighting for her, even if she barely showed up. You're knee-deep in old paper and Napoleon's obsession. You smell like candle wax and melancholy. You haven't blinked in 2 paragraphs. But now something new creeps into the letters, something less romantic and more ... fragrant ... perfume. Perfume. Napoleon doesn't just mention it in passing, he builds entire paragraphs around it. You can almost imagine him pausing in the middle of a military campaign to sniff a handkerchief and sigh dramatically, which, honestly, tracks Dot. In one letter he writes, "Your scent is with me. It burns more than the sun on my back. I wear it." Into battle, this man had a nose and used it. And it's not just Josephine's perfume, he's talking about Tit's perfume as a concept, a strategy, a weapon. Historians still debate whether Napoleon had a heightened olfactory memory or whether scent was simply his emotional filing system. But they agree on one thing: he never forgot a smell. And Josephine's scent with his Proustian, Madeleine soaked in rosewater and musk. He once claimed to use several bottles of cologne a day. Not dabs, bottles like he was drinking it. To be clear, he wasn't, but barely. One of his favorites, eau de cologne, the citrusy kind with neroli and rosemary, which, according to legend, he rubbed on his skin, poured into his bath, and soaked his clothes in. If Napoleon walked past you, he probably smelled like a lemon orchard that had anxiety. But when it came to Josephine's perfume, he was intense. "The sweetness of your neck remains in my lungs. It is not scent, it is oxygen." And here's the wild part: Josephine was famous for her perfumes. She owned rare oils, musks from the East, floral blends that cost more than small villages. Her scent wasn't just personal, it was political. She weaponized it. She wore it to draw attention, to manipulate a room, and, probably, to drive one general completely over the edge. Napoleon was obsessed with that invisible part of her, the trail she left behind, the idea of her lingering after she left the room. In one letter he wrote, "Your perfume clings to my pillow. I speak to it when I cannot sleep." Buddy, that's a candle ad waiting to happen. But it's more than a quirk. It tells you how Napoleon viewed love, as sensory, physical, all-consuming. He didn't write abstract poetry, he wrote tactile memoirs. He remembered the folds of her silk gown, the sound of her walking barefoot across marble, the clove oil on her gloves, and always, always the scent at one point. He even compares Josephine's fragrance to gunpowder. "It strikes me like cannon smoke Swooned, total and never forgotten. This is not normal. This is not chill. This is pure. Bonaparte." But here's where it gets even weirder. Napoleon didn't just associate perfume with romance. He associated it with power. In several letters, he mentioned scent as a sign of influence, almost like royalty, a signature left behind. You passed through the salon, and the room remained yours for an hour. That wasn't metaphor, that was strategy, like a general marking territory not with flags, but with Jasmine and Josephine. She knew it. She curated her scent the way she curated her image. Her entire presence was calculated to linger. She was, as one observer wrote, a ghost in roses. It's no surprise then that when their relationship started to falter, Napoleon didn't beg for her attention. He begged for her perfume. "If you do not write, at least send your scent. Let me believe you walked past me in the night." Now imagine receiving that in the mail in the middle of a war, while cannonballs are flying overhead, and you're just sitting there with a tiny bottle of perfume, wondering what to do next. It's strangely beautiful, right? A man who conquered half of Europe reduced to sniffing aftershave and clutching a crumpled ribbon. But also a little bit manipulative, because the scent wasn't just emotional comfort, it was control. A way for Napoleon to keep Josephine present, even when she wasn't, to make her absence feel like proximity, to turn longing into something he could hold. And in return, Josephine sometimes sent nothing, just silence. That silence, the lack of scent, of presence, of response, it drove him mad. He writes, The absence of you is not empty. It is a stench. The air without you rots. Wow, okay. That's not quite a Hallmark card, but it gets the job done. Even the scholars who try to remain objective can't help but smile at moments like that. It's all just so human, poetically unhinged. And it makes you wonder, did Napoleon know he was writing some of the strangest, most olfactory love letters? You're halfway through another letter, and now Napoleon's handwriting is starting to slope like he's writing mid-galopeur, mid-breakdown. The ink looks rushed, smudged, as if his hand couldn't keep up with his brain. Which makes sense, because somewhere between "I miss your scent" and "I will conquer death for you," things start to get ... strategic, not in a romantic way, in a war room, chessboard, emotional manipulation kind of way. Because now, Napoleon's letters don't just read like love poems. They read like coded dispatches. Like he's writing to a nation-state disguised as a woman. "I have sent for you 3 times. Still, you are absent. I shall send once more, but know this, absence is a kind of battle." It sounds poetic, but you start to realize this is pressure. This is a command. It's a subtle tactic wrapped in metaphorical lace. He wants her to feel it. The guilt, the obligation. Remember, Napoleon was trained in logistics, movement, the art of positioning. That training doesn't disappear just because he's writing. On rose-scented stationery, in fact, it only sharpens. He starts using language like, "If I must withdraw my heart, it will not be in retreat, but in tactical realignment." Oh, that's not a breakup text. That's a war strategy. Historians still debate whether Napoleon's letters at this stage were more about control than connection. Did he still love Josephine? Or was he trying to shape her like Turina an emotional battlefield where he refused to lose? You can almost picture him pacing in his silk stockings, plotting not troop movements, but responses, calculating how many days she'd taken to reply last time, wondering if a bouquet would soften her, wondering if jealousy might work better. Because, yes, jealousy enters the chat. He starts name-dropping other women, not romantically, not even convincingly, just logistically. "I dined with Madame Taline today. She spoke of music and wore a green dress, but her perfume was not yours. It suffocated me." Oof, subtle, right? Even when pretending not to care, he accidentally writes a compliment. But you see what he's doing? He's trying to spark something, to jolt Josephine out of silence, to win, emotionally, in a way he couldn't on the battlefield of their marriage. There's one letter where he shifts tone halfway through, starts sweet, then veers off into what can only be described as a diplomatic complaint. "I send you my whole heart, undivided and trembling. P.S. The money you requested has been sent. I expect it shall be used more wisely than the last sum." Yikes, Napoleon. That's not love, that's a credit report. And then just a few pages later, he's back to full theater. "I write by moonlight." A candle would feel unworthy of this confession. Let's pause there. This is a man who conquered the Holy Roman Empire and still thinks waxing poetic under moonlight is a good idea. And honestly, he's not wrong. You kind of respect it. It's chaotic, but committed. But here's the twist. Josephine starts to fade. Slowly, consistently, her replies become shorter. Her presence at court events dwindles. Her affection, already slippery, melts into politeness. And Napoleon, he panics. "I will not be a ghost in your life. You will not forget me. I forbid it." Sound familiar? That's the emotional version of a military ultimatum. He's drawing a line, setting terms, declaring war on absence. And that's when the letters get strange. Not just desperate, off, like something shifted. He starts referencing dreams, imagined conversations. He writes as though they're already speaking, or fighting, or sleeping in the same bedivan, once you cities away. "You looked away from me last night. Why? You said nothing, but I heard it." He's projecting. Now, filling in her silence with invented arguments, invented reconciliations, his mind is staging full emotional battles she never even attended. And yet, even in these moments of disconnection, he tries to bind her to him through memory, ritual, and repetition. "Every morning I touch the letter you last sent. I place it over my heart. If it burns, I know you still love me." That's a lot, but you have to admit, he's got flair. And maybe that's why we still read these letters, centuries later. Not because they're perfect, not even because they're healthy, but because they are so fiercely human. Napoleon wasn't just a lover, he was a narrator. He turned his feelings into stories, battles, operas, tragedies. He needed Josephine to be a character in the epic of his life. He didn't just want her love, he wanted her participation in a grand narrative. You're in the final letter now. The last page, the last gasp. The paper is thinner, the ink is darker. Even the handwriting looks older, shakier. It's still Napoleon, but there's something missing. You. Well, not you. Exactly. But Josephine. Because this last letter, it was never sent. It was found years later in his belongings, folded and sealed, unopened, unread, as if even Napoleon knew, deep down, that he had lost the battle he'd never really been trained to fight. Love, he writes, I dreamed we were married again. No politics, no titles, just you and the garden and the smell of lilac. That image of garden, no politics'd, be the most unrealistic thing he ever said. And this is a man who crowned himself emperor with one hand and rewrote the metric system with the other. But you read on, because something's shifted. There's no more urgency, no more jealousy, no maps, no metaphors about storms, war, perfume, or ghosts. Just something oddly simple. I miss your voice in the morning. It's plain, soft, human, and after thousands of words, dozens of letters, and miles of emotional terrain, that line hits harder than anything else because it sounds like he's finally telling the truth. Historians are still debating whether this last letter was written after Josephine Dodor, during their final years, when she was exiled from his heart but never quite gone. What we know for sure is that even after he divorced her publicly, politically, he never stopped thinking about her. He remarried, had affairs, wrote different kinds of letters to different kinds of women, but they never read the same. They never bled. They never ached. Only Josephine made him ache, and he let her. He once said later in life, "Power is my mistress, but Josephine was my wife." That sounds noble, right? But let's unpack it, because even in that sentence, he's drawing lines, dividing the parts of himself like territory. Power over here, love over there. As if the two were never meant to, except they did, constantly, and violently. Josephine wasn't just a woman he loved, she was the one thing he couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't conquer, and maybe that's why he loved her most of all, because Napoleon, the master of movement, the ruler of Europe, the math nerd with an ego problem, was just a man, writing letters that mostly went unanswered. You fold the page, and for a second, you feel it, that soft, unexpected punch, that quiet truth he never wrote outright, but hinted at 100 times. He needed her more than she ever needed him, and she knew it. That's why she stayed just close enough to keep his letters coming, enough to stop them. She was his muse, his storm, his silence, and he was never quite done talking to her. Even now, centuries later, we're still reading his side of the conversation, still listening for her reply, but she's long gone, and all that's left is this whisper of paper, this phantom perfume of longing. So you sit a little longer, let the last line hang in the air. I will find you again, in sleep, where I am still yours. Then the letter ends. No flourish, no signature, just space. And now, so do you. Let's slow down for a moment. You're back in your own room now. The candles have melted low. The ink has dried, and the sound of drums and hooves has long since faded into the soft, steady rhythm of your breath. Napoleon's letters are folded away tucked in a wooden box in your imagination, sealed with wax, scented with long-lost perfume. You've read them all, held the ache in your hands, and now it's time to let them go. Josephine never answered most of those letters. She loved him probably, in her way, but not like he loved her, and that's okay, because not every story is about winning. Sometimes, the most human thing in the world is to try to write, to wait, to hope and to never quite get what you wanted. Sometimes, love isn't war. Sometimes, it's silence. But even in silence, there's something that lingers, the echo of longing, the scent of someone who was once very close, the letters you never meant to write, but did anyway. So, wherever you are, however late it is, just know this, you made it through. With ink on your fingers and a sigh in your chest, Now close your eyes, let the past drift into mist, and when you dream tonight, maybe you'll hear a distant voice, still whispering her name, Josephine.